Yeah.
Yeah, don't read. You're reading it at barbecue, please, Lisa. Know what it's called. You know what it's called.
Is it deep there? Oh, no, someone from the street.
Oh, nice, okay.
Look at all the jars. It's neat.
Yeah, okay. All right, for the folks on the Zoom, are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
It's gonna be really loud. I think we're okay. The audio thing's making a little. All right. All right, we've got a few trickling in, so I think we'll get started pretty soon here.
I don't know.
Okay,
I'll forget it.
well, this is a good turnout.
Sure.
Okay. All right, well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. There is a sign-on sheet on the table over there. If you didn't get it on your way in, just get it on your way out. So my name is Emily Hansen. I'm a commercial agriculture educator with the University of Illinois Extension. And I serve Bureau, LaSalle, Marshall, and Putnam counties. And I'm here today to talk to you about a really, really cool project that's going on at the university called the Centennial Soil Archive. But before we can really talk about the project, I need to set you guys up with how Illinois soils came to be what they are. So we're going to go through kind of a soils 101 crash course. We're going to talk about geology a little bit, and then about how our soils formed before we can get into the meat of things. Okay. All right. So I'll start you off with this quote from Henry Jansen. It is by studying soil and by nurturing it that we lengthen and strengthen our whole hopeful communion with the land along the continuum of time. For the soil remembers, and one day, for better or for worse, it will remember us also. And I think that last part is going to be really the key to this presentation today, is that the soil remembers, right now, maybe for worse, but maybe someday for better. All right, so before we talk about soil, we got to talk about rocks a little bit. So I wanted to start us off with a little note on time here. So this is the whole continuum of time on Earth, all 4.6 billion years, condensed down into a calendar year. And that's what's going along the outside here. And it starts at January 1st at midnight with the Earth forming and Precambrian time beginning. And then it ends at the common day, or today, on December 31st. So, why even bother, being concerned about these billions of years? Because all of the time that happened before us is what kind of set us up and laid the foundations for what Illinois is now, and the nature of Illinois and all of our ecosystems. So perspective matters here. So in our discussion of rocks, I'm going to skip over a lot of this and just kind of hit the high points. And I just want to note now that most of the important discussion on our note on rocks isn't going to start until December 31st. So in how our soils form, there's a whole lot of time that kind of sets things up, but the real events that got our soil to where they are don't start until December 31st. All right, so starting with the Precambrian, this is the time that began when the Earth formed 4.6 billion years ago. Precambrian rocks in Illinois are much younger, though, around 1.4 to 1.5 billion years old. And most of these formations we don't see on the surface. They're about 2,000 feet below the surface here in northern Illinois. In southern Illinois, they're about 20,000 feet below the surface. Most of these were red granites, the magma coming up through the crust of the earth. But we do see some Precambrian rocks that were relocated from the glaciers, and we'll talk a lot about the glaciers later. So some of this Precambrian material does end up getting incorporated into our soils because it had been relocated from Canada. All right, so now we're moving into Cambrian time, starting with the Paleozoic era. This is when the Illinois Basin formed. So you might have heard that at one point in our past, Illinois was a sea, right? Like a prehistoric sea. And a lot of that, a lot of our, bedrock and those foundational layers of our soil are kind of forming from these ancient organisms that lived in these prehistoric soils or prehistoric seas. So as organisms would die and they would, drift to the bottom of the sea, they would be, they would get incorporated into that sediment, and we had sediment layers building up and up and up. And this is what eventually formed our sandstones, limestones, mudstones, dolostones, all of the stones come from these sedimentary layers of all of this ancient life decomposing. This is also, kind of where we see our fossils. So a lot of the fossils that we see are from this Paleozoic era and beyond, when we have this history of sea in Illinois. And this image here is if you were to split Illinois in half, this is what our bedrock would look like. So here, roughly around LaSalle, most of our bedrock is much younger than those Precambrian rocks that we just talked about. So Cambrian and periods on is kind of what makes our bedrock up. So onto the Ordovician period. I always hate trying to say that one. I kind of blank on how do you pronounce that. Which I should really lock down because these are the formations that people actually know around here. So our St. Peter's sandstone and starved rock, this was formed during these periods, as well as the Galena dolostone, and some of the formations that you can see at the state parks up that way, in Joe Davies County and Winnebago County. And then our last period that we'll talk about is the Pennsylvanian. The Pennsylvanian strata make up about 2/3 of our state's bedrock. They're sandstones, mudstones, limestones, and also coal seams, which is kind of important. Illinois has a history of coal mining. I think people don't often think of our state as like a big coal mining state, but it is. We have lots of coal. Well, we did at some point have lots of coal here, maybe not so much anymore.
If you live around here, though, people know about coal.
Yeah. Well, hey, I should know about coal. I live in Coal City.
No.
I know about coal. So, most of these rocks from this Pennsylvanian period ended up getting covered by glacial drift. But you can still see some of these formations in stream cut banks and different outcroppings. All right, so now on to like the real stuff. We're at like December 31st now in our grand scheme of time. Before the glaciations, Illinois looked a lot like how it does today. It was a lowland, and 250 million years of erosion had kind of worn it down to this terrain with a lot of shallow valleys, small hills. And during this time, we had a temperate climate. There were 4 seasons, much like there are today. But then the glaciers happened. And this is kind of one of probably the most important part of how our soils formed in Illinois is this history of glaciation in this state. So the Pleistocene epoch was the last great ice age. It ended around 11,700-ish years ago. And during this time, glaciers covered up to 90% of Illinois. You can see from the image here, this has the 3 of the different glaciations on it that were kind of the most important ones, and the direction that these glaciers moved in. So during warmer periods, the glaciers would melt, they would retreat, right? They go back up north towards Canada. And in that melting, they're leaving behind all sorts of stuff, which we'll talk about in a second. But then when we would have more colder periods, they would advance, and they would scrape the earth as they moved along. And these glaciers were massive and they were slow. So they were about 10,000 feet thick, which, to put it into perspective, the tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa, It's about 4 Burj Khalifas stacked on top of each other. So Illinois covered in glaciers looks very different from the Illinois that we know now. And they traveled super slowly, only about 190 feet a year. So just at an absolute snail's pace moving over the landscape. So it took tens of thousands of years of these glaciers to, get Illinois to where we are now. There's evidence of at least 6 glaciations in Illinois, but the 2 main ones that people talk about are the Wisconsinian and the Illinoisan. And these 2 are what make up a lot of our soils today, the materials that these glaciers brought with them. All right, so glacial erosion. Like I said, as the glaciers were moving, they're scraping, they're polishing, they're rubbing, and just like gouging the surface as they slide over it at an absolute snail's pace. And, I think a lot of times we think about that wearing down, but they're also building the land up. So on the end of the glaciers, you would have this glacial till and rocks accumulating that would kind of get pushed along in front of it. And this till was kind of a stony mud that would get deposited. I have a picture in a second to kind of illustrate that. But part of the glaciers too, they were ice, so there's a ton of water there. So they almost had kind of like a flood effect in some areas where they're like scrubbing things down, moving, engulfing huge quantities of soil and rock, pushing it along with them, moving materials from Canada down further south. And they were just like sediment mills, like they're mixing, they're grinding, and the sediments that would get caught up in the glaciers would just get finer and finer as they move south. So the glacial till that we see in Illinois is a lot finer than the glacial till that you'll see in like Wisconsin or in Canada, because it traveled a lot farther to get here. And then the last most important point is that as those glaciers departed, winds would blow this finer, sandy, silty material across the state called loess. And this is what became the uppermost layer of our soil. So when we talk about soil formation in Illinois, loess is a really key part of that. All right, so here's my picture kind of illustrating what the glaciers were doing. As they'd move, they would push, and you get this, it's called a moraine, that would form at the end here. That's made of that glacial till and different sediments that they're pushing. And in Illinois, we have moraines both from the Wisconsin and the Illinoisan. In our area, we're mostly seeing the Wisconsin. And does anyone know like the fun fact about moraines? All right, so when I drove here, I drove past a bunch of windmills. Where do they put the windmills?
On top.
On the moraines. So with how flat Illinois is, the moraines are natural high points in our landscape. So when you see all of these windmills and they're like all in one area in a big line, they're all stacked up on a moraine. So the Marseilles moraine kind of comes into LaSalle County a bit, and parts of some other ones. So you can kind of see like the legacy of the glaciers as they're moving, they're pushing, and we get areas, where they push the moraines up, and there's sediment accumulating, but then we also have outwashes beyond the glaciers. So you'll sort of see as you move west that our soils are different because of that outwash and the components there. All right. So there's our discussion of rocks. We can talk about soils now. So a little quote here from a former president of the U of I. The wealth of Illinois lies in her soil and her future in its intelligent development. And he was president of Illinois from 1894 to 1904. So it's been known for a long time that there's something special in our soil here.
Isn't his quote on the side of the building down there?
Yeah, it is. I don't remember which building,
Yeah.
but it is on the, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to me, I feel like soil is often taken for granted. But it's the foundation of our natural systems. It's where we grow our food. It's kind of a store, a store of our history as a state. And the soils in our state vary a lot because of both natural forces like the glaciers, and then also different human caused forces. And soil is both, a material that, we use to build things, to grow things, but it's also a natural body. It's an ecosystem. All right, so what is soil? It's composed of 5 different ingredients. Minerals, which come from the rocks and stuff from the glaciers. Organic matter, water, gas, and then living things. Our state soil in Illinois is drummer. You can see in the picture here that we have like a really thick layer of this dark topsoil. And this is very unique to Illinois. Other states do not have this, and they're envious that we do. So that's that black dirt that you hear about in Illinois. All right, so talking about these a little bit more, our non-living components, they're the minerals again. So we can break these into 3 classes based on their size: sand, silt, and clay. Sand being the largest and clay being the smallest. And I brought my jar to illustrate this. I'm kind of trapped back here with all these cords. So this is like a fun little thing you could do at home. You take some soil, you put it in a jar, you shake it up, and then you just let it settle. And from this, we can figure out what type of soil we have. So we use this pyramid here, and we look at the different percentages of these 3 components. So which one do we think settles out first based on size?
The sand.
The sand. Yep. Sand comes first, then the silt, then the clay. If you're doing this little experiment at home, the sand settles out almost immediately. Silt after about 30 minutes to an hour. Clay can take a couple hours up to a day. I'll pass my jar around and you can kind of see the layers in there. So I like to bring that to like show kids and stuff. That came from a pond near IVCC because I went to get some mucky soil because I was gonna make a different kind of jar. And then I have that jar too. So if you wanted to figure out what soil type you had, you would just measure how big the whole thing is, and then you would figure out the different fractions of each component. And then we can use the pyramid to figure out what type it is. I don't remember. I want to say that was maybe a silty clay loam. Don't remember off the top of my head though. But yeah, so that's the non-living there. Organic matter is also kind of in our non-living. It's also kind of living too in some ways. So organic matter is made up of decaying and dead plants, animals, microbes, fungi. You can kind of break it into 3 different categories based on how dead it is. So we've got like the kind of dead where it's like freshly dead plants, the dead, which is, things that have been dead for, a couple years, and then the very dead, which are things that are like almost fully decomposed. So in Illinois, we have a lot of organic matter in our soil. And this is really important. So organic matter, how much you have in your soil is kind of an indicator of the quality of that soil, the health of the soil, and also how suitable it is for agricultural use. So in Illinois, we have about 2 to 4%. That's like pretty common. Up to 6%, which I've heard some farmers tell me they have 8%. I don't know if I believe them, but they think that. So we'll let them keep living that dream. But that organic matter is why Illinois has the black dirt. All of it formed under this prairie vegetation that we used to have in the state, which we'll talk about more later. And because of this black dirt and all the organic matter, central Illinois, north central Illinois is the most agriculturally productive area in the entire world. So I went to ISU. They always said McLean County is the most agriculturally productive area in the world. I don't know, I don't know where they're getting those facts, but we'll let them have that. Maybe it's McLean County. I think if you ask somewhere else, maybe they give you a different county, but yeah. So and then we also have our living components. So just like a forest or a prairie, soil is an ecosystem and it's home to many different kinds of organisms. Bacteria, fungi, nematodes, insects, earthworms, small invertebrates. These are both things, that we can see with our naked eye and things that we can't. I'll give you my fun facts. So soil health and the living parts are kind of my area of expertise. So I get really excited about it. We won't talk about too much today, but I could talk about it all day. So in 1 tablespoon of soil, just a single tablespoon, there are more microbes than there are people on this planet. And bacteria in particular, in the planet and also in the soil, outnumber people 1 billion to 1. So even the cells in your body, of all the cells inside of you, 99% are microbial cells, 1% are human cells. So you're more microbe than you are human. And with this, soil is our most biodiverse habitat. About half of the Earth's biodiversity is just contained in the top 6 inches of our soil. So I really like to harp on the living because I think that the living is really what makes soil soil. They contribute a lot of important functions. They cycle nutrients. They contribute to the structure of the soil. They help filter water as it moves through the soil profile. But in the grand scheme of things, they're a very, very small percentage of the whole of soil. So about half of soil is the air and the water. Another 45% are all the mineral particles, that geology that we talked about. And then the last 5% is organic matter. And a tiny little fraction of that is the living organisms, but I think they're very important. All right. So how do soils form? Soils form over a very long period of time from the slow breakdown of rocks and organic matter, from weathering, from the biological activity of these microbes that we talked about, and then also the influence of some key factors, which have a funny acronym, CLORPT. So first, our CL, climate. So the weather characteristics that influences how soils form. Things like temperature and rainfall. So the soils that form in an area that gets 35 inches of rainfall a year are going to be very, very different than the soils that form in like a desert climate that only gets 6 inches of rainfall a year. Climate also influences the volume of soil. So as soil wets and dries, it can expand. Freeze and thaw cycles can influence this too. So climate is a big part of things. Also organisms. So what is going on above ground influences what's going on in the soil. So what kind of plants grow there, what kind of animals live there. An example of this, soils that form under pine forests, where you have all those dropped pine needles, tend to be more acidic because of the properties of the pine needles. Okay, R, relief, or the topography. So, are there hills, are there mountains, are there plains? Soils in more low-lying areas tend to be wetter than those on slopes or ridges. If we're talking about like a mountain kind of area, the soils on the north face of a slope are going to be different than those on the south face. And then the parent material, which we kind of alluded to this with the geology. The parent material plays a really big role in how our soils form and what they end up looking like. And then lastly, time. So it takes a very long time to form soils, but there are older soils and younger soils. Older soils tend to have more distinct horizons in the soil profile, which I'll talk about more in a little bit. And then younger soils tend to not have so many layers. And then also how long like the parent materials have had to weather can affect what the soils look like. So certain clays, if they have a long time to break down, that'll give soil that red color from the iron oxides in them. But if it was a younger soil, you might not see that color. So most of the soils in Illinois developed when the glaciers receded around 10,000 years ago. But there are some older soils in Illinois that you can find in the unglaciated areas. So parts of southern Illinois and the driftless region in northern Illinois. Okay, so most people think that soils are like more or less the same, no matter where you go, that, Illinois soil as a whole is, one kind of thing. But we can actually see really big differences in soils within a relatively small distance. So in a single farm field, you can have multiple soil types. Sometimes 20 plus, but depending on how big your field is. And they can vary in size. You might have a large area that's one type and then a bunch of small pockets of other types. So the type of soil you have, kind of the big thing that influences it is that parent material. So all of that geologic stuff that we talked about, and then also that loss. So the drift from the glaciers, that wind-blown material. This is the most extensive parent material in Illinois. And a lot, let me see. Okay, it's about 63% of the state's land area that is loess-based parent material. And it ranges in depth depending on where you are in the state. And sometimes you can have, in the map here, it kind of shows the different parent material regions. Sometimes you'll have loss over drift, or you'll just have the drift. In some areas we have just the outwash. I kind of talked about that, which would have been beyond where those moraines were. And then I will also mention alluvium. So this is a parent material that's very young. You only see it in the floodplains of rivers. So we do have a bit of it around the Illinois River.
It's interesting, Lisa County did like 4 different types, which is unique for all the other counties. They have maybe 2.
Yeah, because you can kind of, so if we like overlaid the moraine map on here, you could kind of see like that there would be moraines here and then the areas between. So yeah, we do have different parent materials at play. And then there's a map of how thick the loess is in different areas. In LaSalle County, we are about 5 to 10 feet. Some of it's 0 to 5 feet, and that depends on, where you were at. Are you like up on the moraine? That's going to have a different amount of loess on it than areas beyond the moraine.
It looks like it's divided east and west, and the moraines weren't. I don't remember the moraines being so, starkly divided.
Yeah, so the
Like
loess
winds?
is all that windblown material. So yes, so the winds were kind of moving it that way. So you'll see kind of thicker areas, like in bands along here and along kind of the Mississippi. The Mississippi is kind of like a natural barrier to the movement of the loess. Okay. All right, and then I can't talk about soils in Illinois without talking about prairie, right? I would be totally shirking my responsibilities if I did not mention prairie. Because aside from, the influences of the glaciers, prairie is really what has shaped soils in this state. So all of our above ground vegetation influences what's going on in the soil. It influences how much organic matter there is. Before European settlement, Illinois was about 60% prairie. There was more woodlands kind of in southern Illinois and around river regions, but in our area, we were mostly prairie. And the soils that developed under the prairie are that black dirt with the really thick, dark topsoils. And having all that organic matter has made our soils incredibly productive. They have good water holding capacity. So when it rains, the water's not just running off the surface, it's soaking into the soil. We have really good fertility. Our crop roots are able to penetrate really easily. So in some ways, farmers get off kind of easy in Illinois because it is really good soil that we're working with as that base. And you'll see this. The soils in our state 100% reflect having thousands of years of tall grass prairie in them. And here's a picture of one of these prairie plants. This is from photographer Jim Richardson, who's one of my favorites. So this is a big blue stem. And he washes the roots and kind of spreads them out so you can see how deep they are. I wish I had the picture too with him like standing next to this because it's like way beyond his head. So our prairie plants, they have really deep and extensive root systems, and this put a ton of organic matter into the soil. So when these plants would die and decompose, all of that root mass is getting broken down into the soil. So And big blue stem is not the only one. Most of our prairie plants have those really crazy root systems. Very dense, very deep. I like bringing this picture out when I talk about native plants to homeowners. Because all the way on the left there, that is Kentucky bluegrass, which we put in our front yards. And its root system is like negligible, maybe 2 inches if we're being really generous with it. But most of our prairie plants are much deeper than that. This goes down to 15 feet here. So crazy amount of depth that they're covering. All right, so soil is organized into different horizons based on what is going on there. And this whole thing, all of the horizons is what we call a soil profile. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is the original soil surveys. And what they were concerned about was this soil profile. How was it arranged, you know? So we have different layers. The first layer is the O layer, the organic. This is all of our fresh and decaying plant material, leaves, dead plants, right at the soil surface. Next is the A horizon. This is where most of our root activity is happening, where our crops are, you know, the most active. It's, you know, that mineral material that we talked about, but then also most of our organic matter is in the A horizon. We don't really see organic matter moving much beyond that. So we can go all the way down to, you know, the substratum and the bedrock. So in our original soil surveys, a lot of times those top horizons, the O and the A, were so deep, well, they could not possibly get at the bedrock. So the bedrock is often not described because it was just so far down. In some areas, the bedrock, you know, it could be like 2 inches below the soil surface, but most of Illinois, it's many feet below the soil surface. Okay, so those original soil surveys. So scientists really love to group and classify things. It's our jam. Things have to be grouped, they have to be ordered, they have to be organized. So the original soil surveys were established by the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS, because they wanted to classify our soils. They wanted to know what soils are where, if they're good for growing things, you know, how they're arranged, the different horizons in them, and they were and they are still responsible for this. And they put all this information together into this absolute tome of a document called Soil Taxonomy. And every state has this. They've actually digitized the soil surveys, so you can go on their website, the soil survey website, and like see what soil types you have in your area. So at least we're making progress, right? We don't have to skim through the tome. So the most basic level classification is the soil series. These are names given to recognizable soil profiles that have similar horizons, similar drainage, similar parent materials. And the soil series is kind of, I guess it's the most basic, but also kind of the most well-known system, you know, classification level. When we talk about how we use our soils and how we manage the soils, it's at the soil series level. Example of this is, you know, if you're selling farmland, the value of that farmland is linked to the soil series present on that land. So it's all tied into everything. In Illinois, we have 562 soil series. All right, and here's a picture of Professor Cyril Hopkins. He was head of the agronomy department at U of I in the early 1900s, late 1800s. And he is very well known for his extensive research and writings on the soils of Illinois. So everything that we know about soil in this state is based on his research. So he was hard at work in the early 1900s, learning everything he could about soil and putting out a bunch of documents. And even back then, they were able to tell a lot of information from the soil. So they were able to measure how much phosphorus is in the soil, how much magnesium, calcium, you know, these different minerals that are, you know, agriculturally relevant. So this document here, The Farm That Won't Wear Out, was published in 1910. And it talks about the Illinois Corn Belt and the soil there. And it says it's a brown silt loam prairie soil of the early Wisconsin glaciation. That's the most common type. And then he breaks it down with the different things that you can find in soil in northern Illinois. And then he breaks it down. He says, oh, with southern Illinois, that's a different story. So northern Illinois, maybe we're looking at 1,100 pounds of phosphorus in the soil. Southern Illinois, 840 pounds. So they were able to tease out these differences in our soil all the way back to the early 1900s. And here is a quote. This is from a letter that R.S. Smith, who was the director of the Illinois Soil Survey, he sent it to the U of I when they were questioning him about how expensive the soil survey was. Because back then you're sending out a lot of people to do a lot of work on hand in horse and buggy. So we've gotten a lot more efficient with how we're able to get this done. But he said, I cannot conceive of a time when knowledge of soils will be complete. Our expectation is that our successors will build on what has been done as we are building on the work of our predecessors. So this was in 1928 that he said that, and we are still building on that work today. And we still sample soils pretty similarly to how we did in the early 1900s. We just have a lot better equipment now. So in 1904, both of these pictures are at the Morrow plots at U of I. 1904, they're doing it by hand with some soil probes. Now in 2021, we have a hydraulic probe that can go a meter deep and take a big, thick 2-inch core, which you cannot do with human strength. So, you know, we're doing the same process, but we are a lot more efficient now. So you'll see, I actually saw someone last week with a hydraulic probe out in a farm field. I feel like you see when you're like, oh, are they drilling for oil or something? But they're taking some samples. So here's what those samples look like. And you can see we do have this really thick layer of topsoil, really dark. But it's not the same in all of these samples. It varies across the state. And I'm not sure, where the different ones came from. But you have some here, this one, I mean, it's like half of it is that dark topsoil. Some it's much less. So we can get a lot of really important information from these soil cores. All right, so then what you actually want to hear about, the Centennial Soil Archive. So in 2018, there was a barn down on campus in Champaign that was set to be demolished. And the head of the crop sciences department sent a tip over to the soils lab that there might be something in that barn that he would want to check out. And what they found were all of the original samples from the first soil survey in Illinois. There were 14,000 samples stored in mason jars, making this the most complete soil archive in the world. So there were samples from nearly every county in the state. Some of the samples dated back to the 1860s. Most were from the early 1900s. But this was an insane find. So Dr. Andrew Margano, he is the head of the soils lab and he's leading this project. So what I'm going to get into now is thankfully he sent me some nice pictures that they got when they were going through all of this, and then some information about the research projects that they're working on with these samples. So here's a picture of what one of those labels look like. All of the jars were labeled. Not all of them were perfectly legible, but this one is one of the oldest ones from November of 1861. You can see it says Illinois Geological Survey, soils of Perry County, number 9, section 3, T5, R1. So it has all of the location markers in it. So we can match this sample up to the current location. And they even wrote on the label there that it's virgin prairie soil. So this is a very cool thing to find. And some of them had really degraded external labels, but thankfully they also stuck a label inside the jar. So that's important. That's an important note when you're doing science, to label twice. So, you know, these labels are, these are from kind of the later surveys. This one's from 1963. They're nice and typed, and you can see that they've, that this is a silty clay loam. The horizon is labeled. So the reason why there's 14,000 jars is because they separated each of those horizons. So the jar isn't the whole sample mixed together. It's just the A horizon or just the O horizon. So nice and broken down. You know, they noted that it's at 6 to 12 inches depth, McLean County, and then all of the info to find out where this is. So super, super well documented. You know, Douglas silt loam, another silty clay loam, just very, very good information. So what can we do with this? We can match this up to the current locations. So how they have them marked in the original jars is maybe a little broad. So this was pre-GPS. So we would be a lot more specific now, but we can get down to, you know, township, you know, rough location of where it is. And then from there, we can look at our current, so this is a screenshot from the now digitized soil survey. And we can see, okay, they said that this is a Douglas silt loam. So we can look at our current soil survey and see, okay, where in that area are there Douglas silt loams? That's the one circled here. And then we know, okay, we can resample in those areas and match it up with that sample. So, you know, what we're getting just from this sample is 56 years of data here on a change. That, you know, this is very unique to get. It is not common to be able to have soil samples this old to compare to. Okay, so another picture just showing how they link them to our current databases. And the labels all match up with the NRCS PDON data. So Milford Soil Series, A1 Horizon, you know, all nice and matching up. So thankfully not much has changed in the last, you know, 100 years, so that we're labeling things similarly. So, you know, they're able to get a nice one-to-one match with things. And now the soils have been moved to a new pole barn, nice and reorganized. They have the physical library. They've also digitized a lot of the information from the samples. So very nice and organized now. And it took them about 2 years to move things and reorganize things and catalog what's actually there. So now kind of where they're at with the archive is resampling, right? They want to know how have our soils changed over the last 100 years, and can we go back to these same spots and sample them again and see how they've changed. So like I said, this collection is incredibly unique. It's, you know, unique in that it covers such a wide area. So, you know, the entire state of Illinois. Illinois is larger than some European countries. So this is a huge amount of locations covered with these samples. It's also unique in that it goes back so far. So most soil archives that we have now go back maybe 3 or 4 decades. So, you know, like from the 80s, 70s, 80s, maybe later than that. So the fact that this goes back 100+ years is very unique. And then there's just very few archives like this globally. There's really only a handful where there's been like a concerted effort to retain soil samples from this long of a time period. And none of them are at this scale with 14,000 samples. All right. So now they want to look at how soils have changed. So why even bother with this? What's the point? So over the last 100 years, Illinois has gone through some really big changes in how we use our land and how we manage our land. And our study of soil science is comparatively very young. We've only been studying soil for about 100 years. So we can barely tell how soils have changed over a human lifespan, let alone, you know, 2 human lifespans. So this is very unique research that's happening. All right, so what have we changed over the last 100 years? Humans have really done a lot. Probably mostly bad. It takes, like we just talked about, to actually form soils, it takes millions of years, thousands of years. If we're just starting from the glaciers and being generous, tens of thousands of years. So it takes that long to form the soils, but it can take a couple decades to degrade them. So we want to, we know that this is going on. We know that the soils in Illinois have changed, but we want to know how. We want the details. So what has changed over the last 100 years? A lot of this goes to the Great Acceleration. So this is kind of the start of the Anthropocene or the human era. This is when things really kicked up. So when global populations started to skyrocket, when we had, the effects of climate change compounding, where temperatures are rising, there's more CO2 in the atmosphere. And then tied to that, our agricultural practices are changing. Around the 1950s is when synthetic fertilizer use became widespread. Before that, it wasn't invented. So that totally kicked off. And with that, we've got increasing grain yields. Essentially every year now is, a new record grain yield. So, we have to think about how all of these things together, how is that affecting the soil? So, like I mentioned earlier, we have this history of prairie in Illinois. And with agricultural expansion and industrialization, it's just not there anymore. So in 1845, we're looking at mostly prairie and forest. Not even 100 years later, in 1938, it is essentially all cropland and maybe a little bit of pasture. And then bringing it out to 2012, what we've kind of seen is the cropland that we have condensing. So instead of more separated farm fields, it's larger areas of land that are interconnected. We also see, increased urbanization, that urban sprawl, more development. So, with all of these changes, obviously it had to have affected our soils in some way. And scientists really like to think about, how these things might have affected us. So this paper here, from the Journal of Soil Science Issues, because we got to have a journal just for the issues, ranks the priority research questions that soil scientists are focusing on right now. And some of these are things like, soil as a regulator of ecosystem functions. How does that work? Soil's role in public health. How do soils mediate nutrient cycling? Plant microbe interaction, which I was kind of in thematic area 3. But the big focus area for the soil lab on campus is thematic area 4, which is soil formation and degradation. So what are those long-term effects of intensive agriculture on the soil? How has soil fertility changed? What has erosion done? How much organic matter have we lost? I think everyone kind of knows there's probably been some loss of organic matter, but we want to quantify that. So if we look at these samples from 100 years ago, when they weren't farming quite so intensively, compared to today, what are we looking at fertility-wise in the soil? And then from these changes, can we kind of, we have better technology now. We can map things better. Can we use this information to kind of fine-tune these? So there's a lot of maps of the state showing like the fertility of different areas. And we're kind of finding out that some of them aren't quite as accurate as we thought they were. So can we use this work with this kind of widespread resampling to kind of fine tune what the fertility looks like in different areas of the state? And then from there, can we use that to give better fertilizer recommendations? Okay, so how do we tackle this research area? So aside from having a time machine, most of the time you have no idea what happened 100 years ago. So this soil archive we've really lucked out with. So, that it covers such a long period of time. We have the archive. We also do have long-term trials at the U of I. So the Marrow plots on campus are America's oldest experimental fields. They were established back in 1876. So we have data from the Marrow plots going back to the 1870s. So, combining that with the soil archive information, with the resampling efforts, we can get a really good picture of what's going on in Illinois. And we're not the only state trying to look at this. Iowa's trying to do the same thing right now. They have a smaller set of samples than we do, not quite so old, but they're also doing a resampling effort to look at how soil has changed. In Iowa, they started this a little bit earlier than us. So they've really focused in on erosion, and what they've seen in Iowa is that most farmland has suffered damaging soil erosion, and their soil archive doesn't go back quite so far. So this is just looking 2002 to 2010 over an 8-year period that they're seeing these massive problems with erosion, and that this erosion in Iowa is happening faster than what would be considered a sustainable rate of erosion. So agriculturally, Iowa and Illinois are pretty similar. So hopefully with these archives, we can get data similar to this to kind of pinpoint, where is erosion happening in the state? What are the effects of that? Then what can we do? Can we rebuild the soil some way? Can we change our farming practices? And all that. So there is a big effort right now to resample all these locations. It's a couple hundred across the state. They started this back in the summer of 2022, and it is still ongoing. And I will pull up the map in a second here, and we can kind of take a look at that. But the big hurdle for them has not so much been finding out who owns the land, but finding someone to get in touch with to get permission to resample. So finding out who owns it is not hard. Getting someone's cell phone number or email address, very hard. So they've relied a lot on word of mouth, on extension staff doing programs like this to kind of spread the word that this is going on. If you're a farmer and they're resampling on your soil, the soil analyses that they're doing have around $5,000 value. So it's really good information. It's a couple of cores, so it's not having any impact on what you're doing. But yeah.
It's interesting that as big as Illinois is, we have fewer sites than Bureau does.
Yeah.
They've got like twice the number of.
Yeah, and that's another thing with these original surveys is that they were not very well distributed.
Yeah.
There are some counties, like especially down here in Southern Illinois, where I don't know if we would even call these three like in this county.
Yeah.
So if we were to like do this again, it would be a lot more systematic. But hey, 1800s horse and buggy, we should be happy with what they were able to do. And of course, there's less in like Cook County, and they're, it would be important information to have, and they have with the samples they do have in Cook, you would think that maybe they would be useless, being in such a developed area. But they've actually made really good use of those samples to look at how urbanization is affecting our soils. So all of these samples
You might not have a uniform distribution of dots. It's more based on your soil distribution.
Yeah, and even that, I mean, I guess when they originally did it, they were trying to figure out what that distribution was. So I guess if we redid it again, knowing what we know now, we probably would sample quite a bit differently. But before I show you like the interactive map, I need to give credit where credit's due to all the people working in the soils lab to do this research. Dr. Andrew Margano is the lead researcher. He is really fantastic about getting out here in the communities. He's done programs with the South County Farm Bureau before and Bureau County Farm Bureau. So they've been pushing this really hard to try to find out who owns this land and get permission to resample. So I will pull up the map now. Let me make sure that I'm sharing the right thing. The people on Zoom. People on Zoom, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll get there in a second. Alrighty.
While you're doing that, did they have to wait for a grant to start working? This would have been an
They did.
expensive proposition that they just didn't have money laying
Yeah.
around to do.
Yes, so that is part of it. This research is funded by NREC, which is the Nutrient Research Education Council. The work in the city, I don't remember who that's funded by, but someone else. So yeah, research moves at a snail's pace. Not as slow as the glaciers, but hey, it takes a long time to get money in order to get permission to do stuff, to write proposals. It's, that's just, how it is. Okay. All right, I think we're good. Oh, you guys can't see it though. Okay, maybe if I close the PowerPoint.
Yeah. Do you know how many of the Lathrop County ones they found? Might be interesting to.
Okay, there we go. So in LaSalle County, they have resampled a decent chunk of them. Oh, I will zoom in. So if it's in yellow, it's unclaimed. If it's in red, they've resampled it. If it's in green, they have gotten permission, and are going to resample it.
Can you blow it up again?
So in LaSalle County, where's your room started? There we go. Okay, so some of them in LaSalle County are in the state parks, which is a different permission process to resample those. And from what I've heard, the locations in the state parks are not a priority right now. They would eventually like to resample them, but they're kind of prioritizing the farmland right now just for their research questions. So I will show, I live in Coal City and I helped claim that one. So I knew who farmed that one. But yeah, so you can go county by county in here. We are, all right, so here's Granville. So we do have an unclaimed one. This is Putnam County, right? Zooming in on, oh boy. Here, I'll use the buttons. You guys don't need to watch me struggle like this. All right, so it's north of Magnolia.
No, the area end of the leaves. Yeah.
Yeah, so,
It looks like a farmstead right there.
yeah, so I don't know, maybe I should drive out there and put a note in their mailbox.
No.
But I've been trying to kind of get the word out about this. I've dropped off flyers at the seed reps around here and the chemical reps, and we're trying our best. But they have made really good progress on resampling these, compared to where they started. So it's a lot of work, takes a lot of manpower. And they can really only go out, it's kind of a narrow window because a lot of farmers don't want you out there in the middle of the growing season. So they're trying to go, in the fall and the spring. So limited time windows, but yeah, this is an ongoing area.
Are they doing the big probe or are they doing what's the difference between the machines?
I think they have been using the hydraulic probe because they're trying to get that whole soil profile. Cause with the hydraulic probe, you can get it in one go. Yeah. But yeah, so after we're done today, I will send out an email with a link to the interactive map and some more information about the project. In case you want to share it with people, or if you want to, peruse this at your leisure and try to find out who lives here or, who farms this. That's been kind of the other challenge is a lot of times the person who owns the land is not the one who farms the land. And you really ideally want permission from the landowner, but they're not the ones out there a lot of times, a lot of them don't live in this state and, all that. So you want to talk to the farmer, you want to talk to the landowner. It's just quite the process. Okay.
What university department is this under?
This is in
Ag?
ACES. They're technically in the crop sciences department. Okay, let me see if there's a question here. Macon County doesn't look like it has a lot. All right, so any help? Does anyone know where Macon County is?
Decatur.
Decatur, okay.
No, that's Macon,
Mason County.
Oh,
Mason County, South Peoria.
I think they said Macon.
Macon.
I don't do it, Mason, they,
Yep.
oh, Macon,
Oh,
okay.
Macon with a C.
Yeah, that's Decatur area.
Okay, Decatur.
Macon and Decatur.
Area. See, find Decatur.
Okay, there's Decatur. Okay, Macon.
Two.
Yeah,
Yeah, two. And they've already got one.
How are they deciding where to follow up? Like, Bureau County had so many dots, but there are only a few now. Are they not looking for all of them? Just,
Oh, they're hoping to get all of them.
they are.
Um,
Okay.
You know, so much of like finding who these landowners are, it's been like word of mouth.
The low hanging fruit, the ones that are easiest to
Yes.
get. they're gonna
Yes,
work.
so they've probably gotten a bunch, they've gotten like a decent chunk down by Champaign. I really hustled to get like the couple that were in Grundy County, and I think we did like a decent job with those. I've done like 2 programs now trying to pick up some of the ones from LaSalle County. You know, trying to get farm bureaus involved, just, you know, trying to get the word out with it. So if you want to go home and peruse the map, and if you know anybody who farms in this area, you know, that they want to resample all of them.
Do the soil and water conservation districts help with that?
Yeah, we've brought them in on it too. I think probably every agency in the state has like copies of the flyers and is like trying to find these people, get the word out.
So Emily, when they do the resample, do they take the original and then the new sample, compare them? And you had that erosion
Mhm.
map. So are we able to determine?
So that is like one of the things that long term they're hoping to work on. The thing that they've been working on now that is a little bit more higher priority for them is the phosphorus levels. So there is a map that is unfortunately all over the U of I website about, so soils have some inherent phosphorus in them, just based on that parent material. And we based all of our soil recommendations around applying phosphorus based on how much phosphorus the soils are inherently supplying. And what we found with the resampling that they have done is that these phosphorus supplying regions are not even remotely accurate. So we're like our phosphorus recommendations they're not good in the state right now. Very much a work in progress. So they've been focusing really hard on that area, especially too because you know, right now we talk a lot about nutrient loss, runoff, and phosphorus is one of the nutrients that they look at with that. And a lot of the phosphorus runoff has been attributed to our agricultural practices. So they're trying to figure out if, based on these P supply regions, if it's really not our agricultural practices, if it's like stream bank erosion or other types of erosion that's really causing this runoff. So they've kind of been prioritizing those phosphorus areas. What they're hoping to do, so if you want to apply nitrogen, we have a fancy online calculator that will figure out based on the costs and your soil type and you know what you're growing, how much nitrogen you should apply. So they're working on a phosphorus calculator so that hopefully we can dial in these recommendations so that even if, you know, the nutrient runoff is farmer's problem, at least we're giving accurate recommendations now. So, yeah, I imagine that this is going to be a project that they work on and build on for a very long time. Okay, they did tell me where Megan is. I'm glad we figured that out. But yeah, I will send this map out so that you guys can peruse it. Yes.
They will, of course, compare the data between the 2 sets. With the new sample, will they extend their database of the soils in Illinois then with that in terms of other elements of the soil?
Oh, yeah, so right now the samples that they are resampling are the locations from the original samples. But they are doing way more analyses on the soil than what was done originally. So, you know, when I showed that picture, they were looking at, you know, magnesium, calcium, phosphorus. They could look at some things. We can look at much more now. And this is not only of interest to soil scientists, but climatologists who want to, you know, look at how soils are changing, biologists who, you know, we can pull DNA from soil samples that old and find out which microbes are there. So everybody, everybody wants a piece of these soil samples. I think the DNA is really exciting. So hopefully eventually we'll see that kind of research coming out too. That would be fun to see.
Has there been some work in that area?
Yeah, Iowa's doing a little bit of that. Yep. Right, any other questions? Okay. Well,
I
Thank
have
you.
one more about the original samples. After they've been in a jar for 100 years, did they deteriorate in any way, change in any way?
they're still good. We can still get a lot of information from it.
Doesn't seem to be much.
With fresh soils, we can, so if we're looking at like which bacteria are present. The information we can get from fresh soils would be a lot more extensive. But the kind of DNA residues, I guess you could say, are still gonna be in that 100-year-old sample. But I mean, we can get, people get DNA residues from, you know, ice cores that they pull from, you know, Antarctica that are thousands of years old. So yeah, even with them being old, there's still plenty we can see. And then with all of our like inorganic elements that we'd want to look at, phosphorus, calcium, that doesn't degrade. So yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Like, you remember Paul from Breakfast at Cracker Barrel?
All right, you all familiar?
So he's the soil guy, yeah. Was the soil guy, does have counting.
I hesitated when I came in.
Suzanne.
Map, so.
Yeah.
You're doing
I
fine.
was holding him back.
You're doing fine.
Still in the